Morning, everyone. We are up to Paragimel Mishna Zayin, Chapter 3 Mishna Zayin. We have learned previously that when one brings their processed grain into one's home, that's where the Torah says that the grain becomes set for Meiser to the point you can't snap from it anymore. This Mishnah is going to discuss what's considered a house other than your regular house. So the Mishnah reads, Hatzarifin v'haberganin v'ha'il katiyais peturin. We have three structures that we say are exempt. That means these three structures are not considered like one's home, and therefore they will not set the grain for Meiser. What are these three structures? So the first one is tzrifin. Tzrifin, they translate here as a hunter's hut. What's interesting about this hut, the way to describe it is like this, that actually it didn't have a roof, but rather the roof was the extension of the walls. And here in the notes of the art scroll, they were made of willow branches or reeds, which were tied together on top and then spread out toward the ground like a cone or teepee. They were used by hunters as temporary shelters. So we're talking about here, it's a shelter, but again, it's temporary. It's not a regular place of residence. Burganin, they call them field huts. Field huts were used to store produce in the fields, storage places. El Katiyos are summer huts, which were used to provide a shaded area for the farmers to sit in on hot summer days. The farmers were out there working. They wanted a place to cool off from, so they built these summer huts in which they would get some shade in there. So again, all these are not regular places of residence, and therefore they're exempt. The next example of the Mishnah is Sukas Ginoisar. Ginoisar was an area, was a region, the Bartur explains, was very fertile, and it grew very superior fruit in large quantities. So the farmers, who typically didn't live there, weren't living there, wherever they lived, they were coming here now to work on their fields and their orchards. And they had these huts that they would actually stay in over the growing and harvesting seasons. So again, these were temporary also. And this is where these farmers would live in during the growing and harvesting period. And the Mishnah says, even though they have in there a mill and they have in there chickens, which would be a kind of more regular form of residence, more permanent type form of residence, nonetheless, Petura. Nonetheless, we say that this residence that they live in during these periods of time, when they're working on their orchards and their fields, we say that it is exempt. It is also not considered a full residence like a house to set the grain, the produce to Meiser. Now, Sukas hayotzrim, a sukkah of a potter, makes pottery. Now, these huts of the potter, of the people who made pottery, they actually, there were two of them, one in front of the other. The most innermost one, meaning the one furthest in, the innermost one, was actually where he would store his stuff and reside there and live there. While the front one was where he worked and sold. So the Mishnah says, by the potter's sukkah, hapnimis chayeves, the inner one would set the grain to a Meiser obligation. So once the produce gets in there, you cannot snack. But the outer one is exempt, meaning the outer one would not set the produce to the obligation of Chumas and Meisris. And even if you bring it into that outer one, it's going to be exempt. Now, we need to clarify, as is clarified here on the bottom, that, we previously learned that if you have produce that's completed, and you plan on selling it, and you're bringing it into it, and you're bringing it into a store, right? That there the halacha is that a store will be kaveh l'meiser. It will set it to meiser. Now here, the outer one is a store. It's where he works and he sells. Nonetheless, we still say that in this situation, the grain will not become full of meiser even though it was brought into a store. So the difference between here and there, as they bring down here, is that being that this front hut, although it was used for selling, it was mainly used for working. And therefore, it's not like a store that's made for selling. And therefore, so I'm going to read to you here. This front room does not set the obligation because it is used mainly for making the pottery, not selling it. Yeah. Okay, I called it two huts. It's a 2-room hut. And the front hut was where they worked and sold. And being that the front hut is used mainly for making the pottery, not selling it, therefore it would not be kaveh l'maiser. I just realized as I'm saying this that I believe that when we had the case before that you brought it into a store, there was kaveh l'maiser, that was a store that you were planning on selling it in. That's my recollection. So that would be very different here. Here, you're bringing it to a store, but it's not the store that you're selling the produce from. You're selling other things from it. So that wouldn't be similar to the case before, if I'm correct, that before the store that we're talking about, you brought the produce in, is the store you're going to sell it from. That was my recollection. That would already be be able to differentiate between this store of the front room of the potter's hut and the case before. Okay. Now, Rabbi Yossi says, if something is not a dwelling place, both for the summer and for the winter, then it's exempt, meaning it will not be considered a house or your house to be able to set it for trimus and maasros. So this potter's hut was not used in the winter. He couldn't use it in the winter. And therefore, Rabbi Yossi says that whether even the inner room, even though it's your residence during this period of time, but since it's not your residence for the winter and the summer, then it's not considered a bias, a house that the Torah says will set it to the obligation of Meiser. The first opinion did not agree. The first opinion says that being that since it's his residence during this period of the year, that we say that it does come out of Meiser, does set for Meiser. But then we have to differentiate between the Sukkah's Ginoiser, the Ginoiser Sukkah that we mentioned before, where the farmers are there also during a set amount of time. They're there during the growing and harvesting seasons. And there we said that it was not a house to set for Meiser, and seemingly because it's temporary, you don't use it all year round. And here, the Tanna Kama is saying that it's true that the potter's sukkah you don't use all year round, but while you're there, it's your residence. So what's the difference between that and the sukkah skinoiser? So they explain around the bottom that nonetheless, this sukkah yitzer, this potter's sukkah, when he's there, he's using it as a full residence. I don't know, they don't explain exactly what that means, what makes it a full residence and what makes the sukkah skinoiser, even when you have 1 million chickens in there, not a regular residence, not a full residence. I'm not sure. Maybe when he brings the family, when he doesn't bring the family, I'm not sure. But that is the distinction that's made. That according to the Tanna Kama, the Sukkah's Hayotzrim, the Potter Sukkah, where it's a 2-room hut, the inner one is going to be exempt, although in the winter you don't live there, because that is used when you're there as a full residence, while by the Sukkah's Kinoiser, that we mentioned before, while you're there, it's not used as a full residence. Sukkah's Hachag B'Chag, a sukkah on Sukkahs. Okay, what does that have status have? Does that have a status of your house or not? Rabbi Yehuda says it obligates. It is considered a house and a regular residence to set it to its obligation for Trumas and Maasros, and the Chachamim exempt. They say no, it's not. Now, what's the argument here? We know a sukkah is we're only there for 7 days, but we're supposed to treat it like our regular house. Still, the way they explain Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, Rabbi Yehuda says that it's considered a permanent residence is because we find by the laws of sukkah, the Rabbi Yehuda's are the opinion. Rabbi Yehuda's of the opinion that a sukkah has to be fit to be a permanent dwelling. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It has to be fit to be a permanent dwelling. You're not going to dwell in there permanently, but it has to be fit to be a permanent dwelling. According to Yehuda, you got to put up a mezuzah in your sukkah because it has to be fit to be a permanent dwelling. So during Sukkot, when you actually are treating it like a permanent dwelling, and it's constructed and has to be constructed to be fit to be a permanent dwelling, Yehuda says that's a house. That's a house. And therefore, if you bring the completed produce into there, it will be kaveh l'maiser. It'll set it to the obligation for trimus and maisris. You can't snack from it. The Chachamim exempt because the Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say a sukkah is not meant to be fit to be a permanent residence. It's only meant to be fit as a temporary residence, which is a reason why they say you don't put up a mezuzah there. And therefore, it's not considered a house, and what goes into there will not become kavua l'maiser, will not be set for maiser, to say that you can't snack from it anymore. So the Chavetz Chaim is now enumerating the third positive commandment that one is liable to disobey when speaking Lashon Harah. There are times where a person will transgress the positive commandment of you shall judge your friend with righteousness, which means in this context to judge him favorably, to judge him with tzedek, to give him the benefit of tzedek, to give him the benefit of the doubt, to say that what he did was okay, was acceptable, was tzedek, it was righteous. You see your friend say or do something. You can judge it in a positive manner or in a negative manner. Even if this person who you observe did this is called a beinani, he's a middle of the road person. It's not a tzaddik. It's not a righteous person. He's not an evil person either. He's in the middle of the road person. That means, basically he shares his actions are shared between good and not good. Even that person, the person who often will do something wrong in this situation where what he did can be judged either way, the Torah obligates us with this positive commandment to give him the benefit of the doubt, to judge him favorably. If this person we know is a God-fearing person, that means his actions are typically righteous, then we have an obligation to judge him favorably, even if, let's say, the action leads more towards the negative than the positive, then if this is a God-fearing person, we're obligated to judge him favorably. The beinani, the middle person, if it's leaning more towards the negative, we don't have to judge him favorably. We don't necessarily judge him negatively, but we don't have to judge him favorably. But we're talking about, but either way, the obligation to give him the benefit of the doubt would be where, again, it's not 100% that it's okay, but it's leaning more towards the okay. There, by the beinani, the middle of the road person, we have an obligation to give him the benefit of the doubt, to judge him favorably. Now, but let's say you saw this ambiguous act, and you judged it unfavorably, and based on that, you told others about what he did wrong. Or the person who accepts this Lashon Harah, he hears the story, and he judges him negatively based on what he heard. So basically, the person who spoke Lashon Harah, the person who heard the Lashon Harah, accepted the Lashon Harah, are both doing so based on not judging him favorably, giving him the benefit of the doubt. Each one of them has transgressed this prohibition. If you're speaking negatively about something based on an act that you didn't judge favorably when you should have, you have transgressed speaking Lashon Harah, and you have disobeyed the mitzvah of judging someone favorably. Have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbos.